Thanks for coming to a conversation on a warm summer night in West Seattle at rush hour. You guys are the best. I did too. My name is Randy Engstrom. I am the director of the Office of Arts and Culture and the acting director of the Office of Film and Music, and I'm so happy to welcome you back to a space I love with all of my heart, the Youngstown Cultural Arts Center, in the heart of Delridge. Hashtag West Seattle. Thank you, David Bestock and Erica, for hosting us in this historic and super important building. And also thanks to Alex Rose for literally doing 10 people's work to pull this event off. This is the third mixer in a series of 4 that we're doing that are a number of conversations with our community about how this city can better support the creative economy, the working artists, and the industries that power creative economy in our region. The first conversation that we had was about the role that technology plays, both good and bad, for artists and for the creative community. The second conversation we had was about the unique and changing needs of gig workers in this city. And today's conversation is about an issue that we've heard a ton about in every survey and conversation we've had, which is about the affordability crisis that this city is in. Fun fact, 100,000 more people now live in Seattle than when I started this job 7 years ago. That singular downward pressure of there are more people here than there are places to live has started bad and has been getting worse. And one challenge that we are painfully aware of is that we, the city, and we, the community, have not built tools as quickly as the challenge has come at us. So we need to get way more aggressive about how we're going to meet the challenges that the affordability crisis presents to us. Tonight you're going to hear from some of the smartest people I know about that issue, at least in the world of cultural space and the arts and the creative community. And I'm excited to share that with you. I want to also point out that these mixers, this is number 3 of 4 that we're doing, are part of a big overall effort that we're undertaking to talk to as many people as we can to shape where this is going. This effort didn't start a couple of months ago. This effort is years long. Shout out to Kate Becker, who was the head of the Office of Film and Music for many years. There's a bunch of music commissioners and arts commissioners in the room. This issue of how we keep this a city that artists can live and work in, that has a thriving creative economy, is not an issue that came up in 2019. It's an issue we've been struggling with for many years. But we have a unique moment to bring a vision to the city and to the mayor to see if we can make real change and real impact. I think part of that is about how we create long-term affordability and build ownership in our communities. Part of that is about how we create access for our young people, particularly our young people of color, to enter these creative industries. And part of that is how we connect our current workforce with opportunities that exist. Looking at you, Amy Lillard, in the back. We are going to bring tangible policy changes and meaningful investments as a result of this work, and what you advise us to do is going to inform and drive what those recommendations are. So I'm really glad that you're here today. We're using a structure like we have the last few months where we did some of the mixing. There will be more mixing. Also, please tend to your needs. There's food and drinks. Get them as you need. We're going to hear from a lot of really smart and engaged people for the next 30 minutes, and then we're going to invite you into some breakout conversations to give us feedback based on what you heard from these folks. Those can be ideas of things that you think we should do more of or less of or do differently or new ideas entirely. But we're going to invite you, you have numbers on your name tag, we're going to invite you to break up into groups and have a conversation with us about what we can do. That'll take us to about 5:45. We can do a little bit more mixing. Dave probably won't chase us out like with a broom, but he might, I don't know, we'll see. And we'll hang out and we'll spend time and we'll keep trying to build this layer cake to be a little bit better than it was yesterday. So thank you for being here. Thank you for rolling the dice on a summer night at rush hour. I'm glad that you're here. With that, I get to introduce one of my favorite humans in Seattle. I get to introduce one of my favorite humans in one of my favorite buildings. Tim Lennon is the executive director of Langston. He was previously the executive director of the Barra Project. And he was previously, before that, a staff at the Office of Arts and Culture. And before that, he worked in every cultural festival in the state of Washington. Tim's also a leader on the Music Commission. The 2 commissions, as well as our partners in the film community, have been co-piloting, co-steering this process with us. And I'm really glad that Tim agreed to facilitate this conversation. He's going to introduce the panelists. I know they all have a lot to say, so thank you, Tim. Thank you, presenters, and thank you all for being here. I hope you have a good time. Tim Lennon.
Thank you, Randy. And Alice, if I can get your help in just a second. Randy just gave you my whole bio, so I'm not going to waste your time with that anymore. But suffice to say, the entire time I've been in Seattle, I've been working in culture, arts, events, music, and space is an integral part of that. When I was working for the Office of Arts and Culture, we launched the sort of cultural space program, and I was a part of that body of work for a couple of years before heading off to work at the Vera Project and later Langston. Both organizations, Langston and the Vera Project, are great examples of the city partnering with grassroots movements, with local folks, with community, with a need clearly expressed to the city, and meeting them where they were at and working with them to secure space for culture to thrive. And I think that that's sort of my inspiration for being involved in this work. And I'm really excited to see so many people in this room, many of whom have attachments to those organizations and elsewhere. But most critically, Seattle in 2019 is hard, right? It's hard to find space. It's really difficult. We're going to speak with a bunch of really great panelists in a few minutes to talk about the work that they've done, the challenges that they've faced. But I just know that in my almost 20 years in this town, things have changed quite a bit. And we're going to need everybody in this room and everybody that you all know working together if we're going to solve this sort of thing. And we have an opportunity, and we have open ears at City Hall and in the Office of Arts and Culture to get Seattle, the city government organization, to really step up. And it's going to be the input that you all provide us through the conversations that we have together today that's going to lead to hopefully some real systemic change in how we address space affordability and just all the other aspects that are making it so hard on creative folks to live and thrive in this community. So I really appreciate all of your participation in this today. And we'll get going in just a second with the panel. First, I'm just going to review a little bit of the work that the city has done recently in this area. We've got this slideshow here. Thank you, Alex, for helping with this. We all know the problem. Things are expensive. Older spaces are disappearing. We're losing access to the spaces that we used to have as new developments are replacing long-term, affordable places we've been inhabiting. Go to the next one. Maybe. There we go. We're having to move out of town. So many of us are living in White Center, in Kent, in Renton, and commuting in to do our cultural work here in the city of Seattle. The cultural infrastructure doesn't exist in these peripheral cities to create the kind of networked, interdependent communities that we've sort of come to rely on in Seattle. So we're in this bind. We got to travel twice as far, work twice as many hours in our day jobs, just to be able to afford to do the creative work that we love to do. Leases are shorter. A lot of our buildings are falling apart or are soon at risk of being sort of contrary to the law in terms of public safety, important things. Unreinforced masonry buildings are generally not ready for the big one, but those are the only spaces that some of us can afford, so what do we do about that? The city has been involved with a number of these aspects, but there's folks doing it for themselves. I just want to shout out Black Town Hall, Equinox Studios, the folks over in Africa Town on a variety of fronts, both affordable housing and cultural space work. There's some models in other cities, CAST, Mercy Corps in Portland. One thing that the city is looking at as a potential model for alleviating some of the stresses on us is a public development authority model. There's a group of community members and city employees across a number of departments that have been really deep dive exploring this opportunity. And it's one to keep an eye out for. How that functions, how it's governed, what spaces that PDA has access to are yet to be determined. So please keep an eye on that conversation as it evolves over the next several months. The base cohort, Build Art Space Equitably, is a new program going into its second year this year. It's brought together a number of culture workers across a variety of sectors, all equipping us with the tools. I was a participant last year, it was pretty dope. Equipping us, culture workers, with the tools to understand how the development world works, and equipping folks in the development world with better knowledge of how to work with creatives. A lot of times, folks in these new developments don't know how to engage with artists, don't know how to make space affordable or accessible, they don't understand the risks or the non-risks involved with supporting cultural work. And a lot of us just don't have the vocabulary to talk to them about what we're trying to do. So building community amongst these two kind of sides, if you will, has been really great, and it's definitely helped increase not only our respective capacities, but the city's capacity to broker those conversations. So it's been really a positive development. Tiny cultural spaces. This has been a small-scale intervention that the Office of Arts has been involved in, just investing in small spaces, small interventions on the community level, the neighborhood, block-to-block level, allowing organizations to spread a little bit without having to look at like multi-million-dollar developments and capital campaigns and so forth. There's some online resources. I encourage you, if you're looking for space, to check out Space Finder Seattle, the Music Resource Directory, which is just chock full of information across a variety of needs that you might have if you're a working musician here in town. Space Lab Northwest, another great online resource. And the Cultural Facilities Fund. If you're blessed to have a space and that space needs work, you're eligible to apply for this funding from the city. There are other grant programs around, Equitable Development Initiatives, another one that comes to mind. $100,000 to support all these sort of project expenses is not a whole lot of money. Like most capital campaigns are 10 to 20 times that amount just to get started, but it helps, right? It's a little bit of an intervention. Bottom line, everything in this slideshow has been good, but it's not been enough, right? We need the city to do more, and we're here to hear from you all what more we can do. So we're getting together for this sort of conversation. We're going to hear from our panelists in just a second, and then we're going to ask you all to talk amongst yourselves. We'll be writing down, taking down notes as to what the city could do better to support your needs. So with that, I'll just invite my panelists to please come up, and then we'll do introductions real quick. Okay, so let's start maybe down at the other end there, and if you could just please introduce yourselves, what organizations you're with, and why you think cultural space is important. This conversation about cultural space is important right now.
Just another fun one. My name is David Bestock. I am the Executive Director of the Delridge Neighborhoods Development Association. Welcome to our Youngstown Cultural Arts Center. Why do I think this? I mean, the affordability issue is why we're here. That's what we're talking about, and we're all feeling the pressures of that. So in terms of why we're talking about it now, that's, I mean, the answer's in the question. But I think we're in a space where it's like, if we don't do something right now, then we won't really, it's going to skyrocket and get even more out of reach. So excited to be part of the conversation.
Hi everybody, I'm Cassie Chin. I am with the Wing Luke Museum, and I've worked in the Chinatown International District for the last 20 plus years, but I'm also on the Seattle Arts Commission. I'm the co-chair on the Facilities and Equitable Development Committee, and I'm also on the Interim Equitable Development Initiative Advisory Board. Why do I think cultural space is important? I've been on the receiving end of being a beneficiary of experiencing cultural space, especially through the Wing Luke Museum, starting connecting there when I was in college, actually younger, but the museum gave me a place to understand my identity in a context where Asian Americans, people of color, have been traditionally excluded from the city, from the nation, from our schools. So to better understand my roots, it gave me a place to connect with the generations before me, connect with my grandfather, understand where I came from, but also where our community wanted to go, and to have that place called home. And I think it's my responsibility to pay it forward, right? I've been on the receiving end of that. It's a shame that other folks aren't able to experience that as well. So that's why I'm so passionate about cultural space, and why I'm especially passionate about thinking it through a racial equity lens, because communities of color have not been invested in historically. We've been excluded from amazing cultural spaces, and you can see it in our geography. You can see it in the way wealth has been distributed, and I think we're building to be able to intervene in that, to make change, so more people can experience the richness that we all have the right to.
I appreciate those words. So my name is Julie C. I wear a ton of hats and work with a lot of groups, and probably a lot of y'all in here also do as well. In thinking about how to introduce myself today, though, I felt like it was really important to talk about what I come to this work from. I'm a homegrown Seattle hip-hop artist, and I'm emceeing here for 15 years. I'm forever a student of the indigeneity that's laid out in the cultural practices and values of hip-hop. And this informs sort of everything I do. I'm someone who believes really deeply that artists and art can save the world, but if and only when we nurture art itself in society at its most purest form, which is what I believe in connection to and accountable towards community and heritage and place, and the specifics of that in any one given geography and neighborhood. Art's removal from this context to me is sort of a sad byproduct of capitalism that's a necessary evil. And it's necessary now, but ultimately doesn't serve artists' true role as change maker and revolutionary for the long term. So to me, the discussion about affordability in Seattle isn't just about me and my homies and my crew having space to create or produce art as an organization or collective. It isn't even really about my own housing precarity, which is something I've been going through for the past 2 years. To me, I sort of stumbled upon this intersection of art and culture policy in Seattle and anti-displacement advocacy really is a direct result of just stumbling upon it and being neck deep in what I've learned these past few years in it. It becomes more and more about harm reduction, about reparation, about healing, about restorative remembrance, and about movement building. It's also about accountability. And so in this intro, I also wanted to say that I'm someone who refuses to separate the conversation of cultural space affordability in Seattle from the living legacies and present struggles of specific cultural communities who fought tooth and nail to hold space here and make the city what it is today. And I ask the same of all of you.
I feel like I should just drop the mic on your behalf. Thank you. So in a few minutes, we're going to have everybody in breakouts, and one of the first questions we're going to be asking collectively of one another is, what type of space are you working for, fighting for, dreaming of? And I'm wondering, specifically David Cassie, how did your spaces go from that dreaming of state to now working for, within, and fighting to preserve? So whether it was, we'll start with Youngstown, how did this place come to be?
Sure, and Randy can probably speak more to it, but I'll speak more broadly about it. It was a group of neighbors in the community. This building was shut down in '89 as a school. It was an elementary school from 1917 until 1989. It was closed for seismic retrofit reasons. It became refrigerator and bus tire storage for a while, and then was getting tagged and was boarded up. And neighbors in Delridge said, this is kind of a blight on our community. We need to transform this into something positive. And we're currently in the Paul Fishberg Movement Studio. Paul was the founder of DNDA and was a true heart-driven coalition builder. And so talked with neighbors, talked with arts leaders, talked with cultural leaders. And a lot of the tenants, we do a lot of things here. And many of the nonprofit tenants who are here have been here since Youngstown opened as what it is in 2006. So they were part of the visioning process for what this is. So it kind of came out of need of like, this isn't helping the neighborhood with the graffiti and the whatever, and we're sitting on this huge asset. So DNDA negotiated with the school district, purchased the building, did a huge capital campaign. It was actually called the 3 Projects, 1 Community campaign, and it funded 2 new construction projects, one of which is 21 affordable townhomes, 20 blocks south of here. The other one is where the Seattle Food Bank is, with 34 units of affordable housing, as well as the food bank, and then the purchase and renovation of this building. So that was a $30 million capital campaign 13 years ago, something like that. But I think the visioning of what this place is and what it is, for those who don't know, there's 36 units of affordable housing for artists upstairs. There's 7 nonprofit tenants on the main floor, in addition to an alternative public high school, as well as our rental spaces here in our movement studio, theater, kitchen, classroom spaces. And it's a really wonderful blend and collaborative laboratory for the nonprofits, local businesses. It's really been a space meant to welcome and support youth, particularly low-income families, youth of color, engaging in arts and cultural experiences, but really being a landing place first and foremost, and then who's here, let's plug them in to some art activities. We've got Art Square in the building, we've got Totem Star in the recording studio right here. If you're in the building, you hang out long enough, you're going to slip on some art and be involved. And so that I really just picked up the torch of that, but definitely have learned a lot about the creation of it. And I think what made it so successful was building that coalition before the doors opened and really saying, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? What are the shared needs? How can we make this space as dynamic as possible to accommodate those needs? So I think that was the genesis.
I think the Wing Loop is a good example of what could happen with organizations over time, right? The Wing Loop Museum is over 50 years old. We're in our third space. I've been fortunate in the third grade, I went to our first space, we leased a half storefront, and you can just kind of crawl in and kind of look and then leave. And then we were in our second space, which was a 10,000 square foot garage. We leased that space as well. It was developed by the Chinatown International District Preservation and Development Authority, a PDA, right? So the PDA was able, and this is the reason why I'm passionate about the potential for a cultural space PDA, because it gave us that expertise, somebody who could develop, somebody who could help us, give us that time to further develop our own capacity. And to create an art space, to manage it for us, to keep the rents affordable so we could afford to be there, and to support us while we continue to grow. And then we were able to grow because we create all of our exhibits with community members. We view that enables community not only to participate in our place, but to view that they own it and to steward it, and together we're stronger, and we were able to then move into our current space, which is the first place we've owned. We're the only Pan-Asian Pacific American museum in the entire nation, so that says something about the growth of our communities. To be able to own our own place. Our communities came together, and at a time when our budget was a $1 million budget, we raised $24 million together to be able to renovate and preserve what is at the core of Chinatown, has been at the core of Chinatown for the last 100 years, and then also to renew it and to revitalize it, right? But we had all that help along the way from the PDA, who gave us that time to be able to capacity build. We were able to grow, right, over a spectrum of different places. So I'm excited about thinking about what the PDA could do to support folks if they're doing pop-up, if they're doing short-term leases, if they want to do a longer-term lease, if they eventually want to create their own space, right? So you can journey over that long distance as well. And pairing that then with base that Tim mentioned, to be able to allow our communities, our cultural workers to build capacity, right? To learn how to be developers, to be able to learn how to speak the vocabulary, to network with one another, to gain those tools. We need that. We've been historically excluded from it. It's not something that people have envisioned that we could do, but that's the vision that we all have for us and the growth that we can have. So, not that everybody needs to be a wing loop, but in the spirit of it, right? That's what I want to see us to be able to grow along all that spectrum.
So, I think in both those examples, I'm hearing that there was sort of a disparate collective of folks who identified either one common goal or a series of compatible goals that would best fit under one roof in the case of Youngstown. And I wonder, Julie, in your experience as an organizer, as a community builder, for folks who don't yet have their capital campaign ready to go, don't have that relationship with the school department or the city of Seattle at this point, what kind of support do we need to generate amongst ourselves with one another, and what kind of obstacles do institutions like the city of Seattle present to getting that work accomplished?
Wow. I first want to point out the difference between these two narratives, and that's part of the thing, right? And the reality that each case is very emergent in seizing on what is the present opportunity, but also the disparity in the path that it took to get there. I think that we, as cultural servants, as artists, however we see that work, we have to be really intentional in refusing these predestined silos of the creative industry, whether it be music industry, film industry, however it's defined right now, which is essentially, a framework that is not built for us, right? We must be really intentional about refusing those silos of that, the silos of the nonprofit industrial complex, of civic bureaucracy, and how we see, when we get to that table, what is our role there. And I think that a lot of it is creating, especially when we're talking about from the very, when we're pulling from the very bottom, we're talking like folks that don't have capacity for much more than just getting home and crashing, right? We have to find ways to support the capacity of people to center the work of collaboration. We have to always be looking for new and creative ways to sort of weave the kindred energies and efforts that we see around us. And if we don't, what is going to happen, and what I see happening is, not like to point a finger, but even the very best of our intentions is going to end up as art washing. Y'all familiar with the terminology of art washing? That's some, I'm just going to read it from it. It describes displacement efforts in which we are used as tools, right? In which we are complicit. There's an essay called Art Washing, Social Capital and Anti-Gentrification that is written by Stephen Pritchard, which I really recommend y'all check it out. He said this quote that I wanted to read: "Art washing is the act of using art to smooth and gloss over social cleansing and gentrification, functioning as social license, a public relations tool, and a means of pacifying local communities." He also, what he does in this essay is break down various forms and give examples of how it shows up. He's UK-based, very different story. This is very centralized policy there. But he breaks down the categories into there's corporate art washing, right? This is the Amazon residencies, for example. There's developer-led art washing, right? This is like Vulcan Art Fair, Vulcan Upstream. There is local authority-led art washing, right? This is like if we didn't have dope people in this room. Seattle, I think, would be a hotbed of that, but luckily, I do believe that we have some very subversive forces in city government coming from the Office of Arts and Culture and Film and Music, and I appreciate that. But there's also arts-led art washing. And I think that we, as entities who are struggling to survive as either individual artists or as collectives and organizations, we often are so pumped to be at this place now where we find a place at the table, that we are no longer looking for ways to push the envelope forward and to really be intersectional, not just in our analysis, but in our time and attention, energy, and focus. And so I think that really at this point, like, there's so much power and potential, and it's not even really about the lack of a way of thinking about the boundaries around our work. We can't keep these conversations contingent on a city entity to facilitate them, right? Like, so what do we do, and how do we build equal and complementary power from the very bottom? We're in this room as representatives of our community. Like, what do we need to really do that job well? That's the part of the conversation that I would like to examine.
Word, and thank you. What do we need is going to be the basic topic of conversation that we are all going to have momentarily. But in thinking about what you just said, and also thinking about how Youngstown, how the wing came to be in its current space. I'll give you a second to think about this, but what is one thing that the city can do, this giant bureaucracy, this giant entity, to reduce the harm of this kind of art washing by very well-funded, less civic-minded or certainly less community-minded organizations? Or alternatively, what can the city do to remove obstacles from community-based organizations' efforts to assert cultural creative control over the neighborhood's destiny, whether it's this very multicultural places like Delridge and the International District, or just small scenes, whether it's going across demographics, going across genres, going across industries. What can the city do to remove obstacles for that kind of community building efforts with regards to space? If you can just think of like one thing that would make recreating a space like this easier, or make imagining having our own spaces, whatever that looks like, more possible. We'll start with you, David, and come back this way.
Good question. I don't know about the one thing. One thing that I don't know any of the answers here, and I'm excited to learn more. I've been in the PDA conversations, but it all lives like this far over my head, so I kind of keep learning as we keep building it. But I think, we run affordable housing. We have 7 properties. This is our main cultural space, but we do other cultural work in the community, but kind of having some sort of pulse on the neighborhood in some ways. I'm just really curious at looking at how can we hold developers to task who are bottom line focused to incentivize investment in cultural communities in the spaces where they're moving into and taking ownership of. And I just want to shout out the Facilities and Equitable Development Committee for having this conversation around cultural space, starting at the place of how do we talk about ownership when we're talking about stolen land? Because that is that's an important framework to enter into. And it's a super confusing conversation to be a part of, right? But that's a conversation that we have to have because that's the reality that we're living in. So Julie, I just appreciate your kind of, your focus on the city is this thing, but like we are people and we all exist, in, around, outside of, on top of, under that thing, and how can we build strength and power more organically. So I just appreciate that. I appreciate the perspective of entering into the conversation from that. And to me, sort of the opposite of that is, investments in real estate by people who have maybe never been where they're buying a thing and have no idea of who or what they're displacing. And so for me, the city approves permits, sets tax structures, and if we can channel funds from those who are making money hand over fist on some of these pressures and channel it back into those feeling the other end of that pressure, to me that's a role and a lever that the city can swing a bit. I've never written a tax law or any law, so I don't know what that looks like. But as someone, we're also looking for land. We want to develop more affordable housing. We want to build a grocery store. We're in a food desert here. But we're competing against folks who can just be like, oh, you want $2 million tomorrow? Yeah, I got it. It's like, it takes us a few years to come up with that kind of money, and we can actually do it in a few years, where many people can't even, like $2 million, forget it. We're going elsewhere. So I just think, as we're looking to secure land, it's kind of hilarious. Sad, but hilarious in terms of the market forces. So how can we sort of pull some levers to channel some of those market forces? And I think there's part of that that's creating financial value of culture and art, which is an ongoing conversation, I think. And some people don't, they are bottom line focused. How can we have art and culture show up on that bottom line in a way where they have to pay attention? And how can we hold them to task for some of the just, the bottom line driven development to support humans.
Quick, 3 things come to mind in reflecting on my journey at the Wing Luke. One, I would want the city to acknowledge the inequitable investment that it has done and continues to do in arts and culture, and be transparent about the processes that has happened under, right? On a real practical level, it's always this look learning after the fact, right? I've learned after the fact. Oh, that's how Benaroya got done. Oh, that's how, the Olympic Sculpture Park and Seattle Art Museum. Oh, Museum of Flight. Okay, that, like, it's always after the fact. And so I don't know then when I'm talking to folks in the city, when they tell me, oh no, we don't do that anymore. They're like, come on, you just did it, right? But if I don't know that, I can't call them on it, and I can't benefit or use the tools that other people have used to benefit their community. So that's one. Two, I would want the city to trust me, right? Trust our communities. We've lived and worked in these communities. We've shepherded them for generations. But you don't trust that I know, and I know the people in the communities, and we know what direction we want to go in, right? It's always like this double standard. Say even with the racial equity toolkit. I need to apply the racial equity toolkit and demonstrate to you that I am being racially equitable. When you as a city have never adequately applied the racial equity toolkit to working with me, right? It's that double standard. Like, I have to meet a higher standard of showing that I am racially equitable when the city has never demonstrated that they're racially equitable. So why don't you trust me and trust our communities that we are invested, we have invested, and we know the direction we want to go in. So that's two. And then third, on a kind of more positive note, I think the city can intervene in thinking about how we can make this magic work of cultural capital, social capital, and financial capital, right? And how can we make it so we don't keep undervaluing or thinking it's just volunteer contributed the cultural and social capital that our communities have. How can we take that and how can it be brought all together so that in the end we still hold our cultural and social capital and we gain financial capital as well and are able to build wealth in, this unfortunate, we are in a capital society. It is about how can we think about wealth distribution and how can communities of color gain some more ground in that.
All right, Julie, what's one thing?
One thing is there's so much uncompensated cultural labor that goes into even participating in some of these conversations. And if the city could find a way, there is a way, there's got to be a way. We got cryptocurrencies, all this stuff. Find a way to track and compensate people for their current burden of uncompensated cultural labor in the form of subsidized rent, parking, transportation, utilities. There's a lot of publicly held resources that this could go directly towards that could alleviate some other burdens in people's lives that is so doable.
So much food for thought, and I hope that in the conversation that's to follow, the conversations that you all will be participating in, you will think big. I mean, we just heard about utility discounts for our cultural, that's dope, right? Subsidies. Compensation. Fair exchange. I want to just give a quick round of applause to our panelists. These folks have been doing this work for a very long time, and they're just deep in it right now, and I really just appreciate being a part of the work with them, and appreciate you all taking the time this evening for this. Now the real work begins for you all. Alex is going to come up here and sort of outline the next steps here. But thank you all for being a part of this, and really there's going to be folks taking notes at every one of these conversations. Tell the city what you want them to hear, and don't hold back. Thank you.